The Fluoride Deception. Introduction. A clear and present danger. Warning. Keep out of reach of children under 6 years of age. If you accidentally swallow more than used for brushing, get medical help or contact a poison control center right away. Next time you confront yourself in the bathroom mirror, mouth full of foam, take another look at that toothpaste tube. Most of us associate fluoride with the humdrum issue of better teeth and the promised fewer visits to the dentist. Yet the story of how fluoride was added to our toothpaste and drinking water is an extraordinary, almost fantastic tale. The plot includes some of the most spectacular events in human affairs, the explosion of the Hiroshima atomic bomb, for example. Many of the principal characters are larger than life, such as the father of public relations, Edward L. Bernays, Sigmund Freud's nephew, who was until now more famous for his scheme to persuade women to smoke cigarettes. And the twists and turns of the fluoride story are propelled by nothing less than the often grim requirements of accumulating power in the industrial era, the same raw power that is at the beating heart of the American century. Fluoride lies at the elemental core of some of the greatest fortunes that the world has ever seen, the almost unimaginable wealth of the Mellons of Pittsburgh and the DuPonts of Delaware. And no wonder the warning on the toothpaste tube is so dramatic. The same potent chemical that is used to enrich uranium for nuclear weapons, to prepare sarin nerve gas, and to wrestle molten steel and aluminum from the Earth's ore is what we give to our children, first thing in the morning and last thing at night, flavored with peppermint, strawberry, or bubble gum. Fluoride is so muscular a chemical that it has become a lifeblood of modern industry, pumped hotly each day through innumerable factories, refineries, and mills. Fluoride is used to produce high-octane gasoline, to smelt such key metals as aluminum, steel, and beryllium, to enrich uranium, to make computer circuit boards, pesticides, ski wax, refrigerant gases, Teflon plastic, carpets, waterproof clothing, etched glass, bricks and ceramics, and numerous drugs such as Prozac and Cipro. Fluoride's use in dentistry is a sideshow by comparison, but its use in dentistry helps industry too. How does it work? Call it elemental public relations. Fluoride is so potent a chemical that it's also a grave environmental hazard and a potential workplace poison. So, for the industry-sponsored scientists who first promoted fluoride's use in dentistry, linking the chemical to better teeth and stoutly insisting that, in low doses, it had no other health effect helped to change fluoride's image from poison to panacea, deflecting attention from the injury that factory fluoride pollution has long wreaked on workers, citizens, and nature. Hard to swallow? Maybe not. The facelift performed on fluoride more than 50 years ago has fooled a lot of people. Instead of conjuring up the image of a crippled worker or a poisoned forest, we see smiling children. Fluoride's ugly side has almost entirely escaped the public gaze. Historians have failed to record that fluoride pollution was the biggest single legal worry facing the atomic bomb program following World War II. Environmentalists are often unaware that since World War II, fluoride has been the most damaging poison spilling from factory smokestacks and was, at one point during the Cold War, blamed for more damage claims against industry than all 20 other major air pollutants combined. And it was fluoride that may have been primarily responsible for the most notorious air pollution disaster in U.S. history. The 1948 Halloween nightmare that devastated the mill town of Donora, Pennsylvania, which jump-started the U.S. environmental movement. It's the same story today, more happy faces. Yet we are exposed to fluoride from more sources than ever. We consume the chemical from water and toothpaste, as well as from processed foods made with fluoridated water and fluoride-containing chemicals. We are exposed to fluorine chemicals from often unrecognized sources, such as agricultural pesticides, stain-resistant carpets, fluorinated drugs, and such packaging as microwavable popcorn bags and hamburger wrappers, in addition to industrial air pollution and the fumes and dust inhaled by many workers inside their factories. Fluoride's double-fisted trait of bringing out the worst in other chemicals makes it especially bad company. While a common air pollutant, hydrogen fluoride, is many times more toxic than better-known air pollution villains, such as sulfur dioxide or ozone, it synergistically boosts the toxicity of these pollutants as well. Does fluoride added to our drinking water similarly increase the toxicity of the lead, arsenic, and other pollutants that are routinely found in our water supply? As we shall see, getting answers to such questions from the federal government, even after 50 years of endorsing water fluoridation, can prove impossible. By the mid-1930s, European scientists had already linked fluoride to a range of illnesses, including breathing problems, central nervous system disorders, and especially an array of arthritis-like musculoskeletal problems. But during the Cold War, in one of the greatest medical vanishing acts of the 20th century, fluoride was systematically removed from public association with ill health by researchers funded by the US military and big corporations. In Europe, excess exposure to fluoride produced a medical condition described as pokerback, or crippling skeletal fluorosis, among factory workers. But the chemical somehow behaved differently when it crossed the Atlantic, the industry-funded researchers implied, failing to produce such disability in the United States. It was a deceit, as we shall see, scientific fraud on a grand and global scale, a lawyerly ruse to escape liability for widespread worker injury, a courtroom hustle made possible and perpetuated by the suppression of medical evidence and by occasional perjury. Your history is all mixed up, say supporters of water fluoridation. The story of how fluoride was added to our toothpaste and water is a separate history, unrelated to fluoride's use in industry, they maintain. But there is only one story, not two. The tale of the dental wonder chemical and the mostly secret account of how industry and the US military helped to create and polish that public image are braided too closely to distinguish between them. The stories merge completely in the conduct of two of the most senior American scientists who led the promotion of water fluoridation in the 1940s and 1950s, Dr. Harold Carpenter Hodge and Dr. Robert Arthur Kehoe. Don't blame the dentists. They were taught that fluoride is good for teeth. Few realize that Dr. Hodge, the nation's leading fluoride researcher who trained a generation of dental school deans in the 1950s and 1960s, was the senior wartime toxicologist for the Manhattan Project. There he helped choreograph the notorious human radiation experiments in which hospital patients were injected with plutonium and uranium, without their knowledge or consent, in order to study the toxicity of those chemicals in humans. Hodge was similarly charged with studying fluoride toxicity. Building the world's first atomic bomb had required gargantuan amounts of fluoride. So, for example, on behalf of the bomb makers, he covertly monitored one of the nation's first public water fluoridation experiments. While the citizens of Newburgh, New York, were told that fluoride would reduce cavities in their children, secretly blood and tissue samples from residents were sent to his atomic laboratory for study. Some dentists are unaware that much of the fluoride added to drinking water today in the United States is actually an industrial waste, scrubbed from the smokestacks of Florida phosphate fertilizer mills to prevent it from damaging livestock and crops in the surrounding countryside. In a sweetheart deal, these phosphate companies are spared the expense of disposing of this fluorosilicic acid in a toxic waste dump. Instead, the acid is sold to municipalities, shipped in rubber-lined tanker trucks to reservoirs across North America and injected into drinking water for the reduction of cavities in children. So toxic are the contents of the fluoride trucks that in the aftermath of the September 11th terrorist attack, authorities were alerted to keep a watchful eye on road shipments of the children's tooth decay reducer.
I had no idea where the fluoride was coming from until the anti-fluoridationists pointed it out to me.
Dr. Hardy Limeback, the head of preventative dentistry at the University of Toronto, Canada, and a former leading fluoridation supporter, told me,
I said, "You have got to be wrong. That is not possible."
Those same phosphate manufacturers were members of an influential group of industries that sponsored Dr. Robert Kehoe's fluoride research at the University of Cincinnati during the 1940s and 1950s. Kehoe is better known today for his career-long defense of the safety of adding lead to gasoline, now discredited. But he was also a leading figure reassuring citizens and scientists of the safety of industrial fluoride and water fluoridation, while burying information about the chemical's toxic effects and privately sharing doubts with his corporate sponsors about the safety of even tiny amounts of the chemical. Not surprisingly, peering behind the 50-year-old facade of smiling children with rows of picket fence white teeth is difficult. Industry is reluctant to have its monument to fluoride safety blackened or its role in dental myth-making explored. Several of the archives I visited had gaping holes or missing documents, and some were closed entirely. And many scientists are reluctant to speak critically about fluoride, mindful of the fate of researchers who have questioned the government line. Scientists have been fired for their refusal to back down from their questions about the safety of fluoride, blackballed by industry, or smeared by propagandists hired by the U.S. Public Health Service and the American Dental Association. Bodies litter the field, one senior dental researcher told me when he learned that I was writing a book on fluoride. Myths are powerful things. Mention of fluoride evokes a skeptically cocked eyebrow from liberals and conservatives alike, and an almost reflexive mention of the 1964 Stanley Kubrick film, Dr. Strangelove. The hilarious portrayal of General Jack D. Ripper as a berserk militarist obsessed with communists adding fluoride to the nation's water became a cultural icon of the Cold War and perhaps the movie's most famous scene. Today, Niall Southern, the son of Dr. Strangelove's screenwriter Terry Southern, remarks that the news that U.S. military and industrial interests, not communists, promoted water fluoridation is just shocking. Terry and Stanley Kubrick would have been horrified by it. The media caricature was largely false. The national grassroots struggle against water fluoridation was a precursor of today's environmental movement with multicolored hues of political affiliation. It was led by veteran scientists with distinguished careers safeguarding public health, including the doctor who warned the nation about the dangers of cigarette smoking and the risk from allergic reaction to penicillin. Yet, instead of being seen as medical pioneers and Minutemen, warning of the encroachment of industrial poisons, anti-fluoridationists are portrayed as unscientific and isolationist, the modern equivalent of believing that the Earth is flat. It is the U.S. medical establishment that is out on a limb, say critics. Adding to water a chemical so toxic that it was once used as rat poison was a uniquely American idea and is increasingly a lone American practice. Most European countries do not add fluoride to their water. Several nations have long since discontinued the practice, doubting its safety and worth. Fluoride may help teeth, but the evidence is not overwhelming. Although rates of dental decay have fallen significantly in the United States since the 1940s, similar improvements have been seen in countries where fluoride is not added to the water. Improved dental care, good nutrition, and the use of antibiotics may explain the parallel improvement. A largely sympathetic official review of fluoridation by the British government in 2000 found that most studies of the effectiveness of fluoridated water were of moderate quality, and that water fluoridation may be responsible for 15% fewer cavities. That's a far cry from the 65% reductions promised by the early promoters of fluoride, with revelations that such health problems as central nervous system effects, arthritis, and the risk of bone cancer were minimized or concealed entirely from the public by early promoters of fluoride. The possible benefit of a handful of better teeth might not be worth running the risk. How many cavities would have to be saved to justify the death of one man from osteosarcoma? Asked the late Dr. John Colquhoun, the former chief dental officer of Auckland, New Zealand, and a fluoride promoter turned critic.
I did not realize the toxicity of fluoride,
said Dr. Limeback, the Canadian.
I had taken the word of the public health dentists, the public health physicians, the USPHS, the USCDC, the ADA, the CDA, Canadian Dental Association, that fluoride was safe and effective without actually investigating it myself.
Even the theory of how fluoride works has changed. The CDC no longer argues that fluoride absorbed from the stomach via drinking water helps teeth. Instead, the argument goes, fluoride strikes at dental decay from outside the tooth, or topically, where, among other effects, it attacks the enzymes in cavity-causing bacteria. Drinking fluoridated water is still important, according to the CDC, because it bathes the teeth in fluoride-enhanced saliva, a cost-effective way of reaching poorer families who may not have a balanced diet, access to a dentist, or the regular habit of brushing with fluoride toothpaste. But swallowing treated water allows fluoride into our bones and blood, where it may be harmful to other parts of the body, say critics. If fluoride can kill enzymes in tooth bacteria, its potentially crippling effects on other enzymes, the vital chemical catalysts that regulate much biological activity, must be considered.
When I investigated such questions, I said, "This is crazy. Let's take it out of the water because it is harming so many people, not simply the dental fluorosis, the white mottling on teeth caused by fluoride, but now we are seeing bone problems and possibly cancer and thyroid problems. If you are really targeting the poor people, let's give toothpaste out at the food banks. Do something other than fluoridate the water supply,"
said Dr. Lineback.
Then the fluoride promoters kept saying, "Well, it is cost-effective." That is a load of crap. It is cost-effective because they are using toxic waste, for crying out loud.
History tells us that overturning myths is rarely easy, but we have been down this path before. The fluoride story is similar to the fables about lead, tobacco, and asbestos, in which medical accomplices helped industry to hide the truth about these substances for generations. Fluoride workers share a tragic fate with the souls who breathed beryllium, uranium, and silica in the workplace. Endless studies that assured workers that their factories and mines were safe concealed the simple truth that thousands of people were being poisoned and dying painful early deaths from these chemicals. So if this tale of how fluoride's public image was privately laundered sounds eerily familiar, maybe it's because the very same professionals and institutions who told us that fluoride was safe said much the same about lead, asbestos, and DDT, or persuaded us to smoke more tobacco. Lulled by half a century of reassurances from supporters of fluoride in the public health establishment, many doctors today have no idea of the symptoms of fluoride poisoning. A silent killer may stalk us in our ignorance.
There is a black hole out there in terms of the public and scientific knowledge,
says former industry toxicologist Dr. Phyllis Mullenix.
There is really no public health issue that could impact a bigger population. I don't think there is an element of this society that is not impacted by fluoride. It is very far-reaching and it is very disturbing.
50 years after the U.S. Public Health Service abruptly reversed course during the darkest days of the Cold War and endorsed artificial water fluoridation, it is time to recognize the folly, hubris, and secret agendas that have shackled us too long, poisoning our water, choking our air, and crippling workers. It is time, as the Quakers ask in life, to speak truth to power. Good science can sharpen the tools for change, but it will be public opinion and citizen action that strike those shackles free.